I am going to turn it over to Naki Braga with Geomancer Permaculture, and he's going to share about the kill rush food forest in general. So, there you are, sir.
Thank you, Lee. Yep. Awesome, appreciate it. Thanks, everybody. Everybody hear me okay? Good. So, yeah, as Lee just mentioned, my name is Naki Braga, the founder of this organization called Geomancer. And in that capacity, I have the honor, the privilege of being the organizer for Kill Rush Food Forest in Lexington, Kentucky. It is the largest public food forest in the state, at least I believe it to be so. And so really thank you for inviting me out here. I don't usually get to talk about this outside of Lexington, so it's really exciting to share this. I am going to talk about food forest design tonight, but our conditions in Lexington are a little different, right? Our geology is different, the urbanization is different, the topography is different. So I'm not going to get into a bunch of detail on like first you do this, then you do this, because we don't have the time for that. But I'm going to talk conceptually, philosophically about how I approach this, and hopefully that will be relevant to you. If it's not, I hope during the Q&A, by all means, nudge me back in a direction that will be relevant to you. But let's start with this idea of food forests, right? Buzzword, real popular in the 90s, then people kind of forgot about them for a while, now they're having a resurgence. And it's a good term for us to use, so we all know what we're talking about, but really we should be aware that every forest is a food forest, right? Every forest is a food forest for the beings that inhabit it, human, non-human, whatever. And it's a question of legibility, whether we are interpreting, whether we are seeing that landscape as an agriculturally productive or an ethnobotanically significant kind of ecosystem. So that is a culturally embedded kind of prejudice that we have. And in order to really appreciate food forests or food forest systems, agroecology, agroforestry systems, maybe we have to unlearn some of what we take for granted about what agriculture is, what it's supposed to look like. So I kind of prefer the term forest gardening because it's a verb, right? So we're talking about actions that we're taking. It is, again, a cultural construct. It's something that we do together. And I'm going to define this. Forest gardening is designing polycultures that mimic the structure, leveraging the emergent properties of forest ecosystems. Doesn't have to just be forest, right? It can be grasslands, swamps, whatever. And mostly for me what this means is that I'm designing based on what I've seen out in the forest. When I go hiking somewhere and I see, I know that I'm in a calcareous cove, north-facing slope, something like that, and then I start seeing tulip poplars, and I start seeing red mulberry, and I start seeing spice bush, and I start seeing pawpaw, and none of that was planted by me, probably not by any other human as well, but they're all playing nicely together, right? I can sit there in the forest, I can kind of take in what's the architecture of this community, what's the spatial relationships between these species, and that kind of goes in my memory banks, and that's what I'm drawing on for the most part. Of course, we have academic knowledge. Okay, what do the root systems look like? How do we put things next to each other that aren't going to compete? Stuff like that. We do think through that, but ultimately, we are leveraging our knowledge of natural systems, right? And yeah, mimicking is maybe not the best word because ultimately we want to do more than just mimic, right? We want to achieve actually that complexity, but you see where I'm going with this, I think. So this is, Lee mentioned this, the 7 layers of every forest. This is one way that people kind of conceptualize this. I would say that this is very reductionist. And this is probably not the best place to start, but you can wrap your head around at least this idea of a polyculture, that we don't just have a monoculture of one crop. We can actually exploit all the different kind of strata of both the soil and vertical space, horizontal space. Some people will add a fungal layer in here as well. Some people will get real detailed with it and come up with like 12 different layers or something. But this is just helpful as a concept. I don't think you need to be sitting there with a book and be like, have I put something in every single layer, right? Because it's not actually going to work out that way. Here's a more sophisticated way to look at forest gardening, I think. This photo, this is probably the most influential photograph in my career. This is taken from a helicopter over the Amazon rainforest in 2006. And these people pictured here are an ostensibly uncontacted tribe. So they're looking at they're seeing a helicopter for the first time in their lives, at least at this distance, right? What's really striking to me about this photo, it took me years to really understand what I was looking at. This is their village, by the way, kind of the most dense area of their population. And look at where they're standing. They're standing under banana palms. They're standing in an orchard. This is, of course, if I were to just go out there and look at the Amazon, I would say that's the forest primeval. That's impenetrable jungle, right? But to these folks, it's a garden. It's a garden. The food is free. It's literally falling off the trees. They're just helping themselves to it as they're walking to their friend's house, right? It's amazing. And it turns out, right, when I was in school as a kid, I was learning about the Amazon. It's the most biodiverse place on the planet. We have to protect it. Humans are messing it up, yada, yada, yada. Turns out humans planted the dang thing. It's so biodiverse. It's so incredibly just the complexity of all the relationships in there and the productivity, even though the soils there potentially shouldn't be that productive, is because of human management, intergenerational, thousands and thousands of years of human management. And we are just starting to, at least from the Western kind of worldview, appreciate and be able to understand the sophistication of that kind of management. This is a common heritage of all of humanity, including on this continent, here in North America. So I know there's a lot of text, but this is an excerpt from a letter from General John Sullivan to George Washington during the Sullivan Campaign. This was a military campaign, a punitive campaign ordered by George Washington against the Seneca Nation. And this guy, General Sullivan, went out and executed it. And you can see this is a genocide, right? So they are wiping out not just the people, not just their material culture, but also their gardens, their agriculture, their crops. And he is documenting thousands of fruit trees of great age, right? So remember, intergenerational. Think about the genetics. Think about all of the work that went into creating these systems. And they were, to a large extent, right? Not entirely, but to a large extent, we have to contend with this history, this physical genocide that happened. And I'm not up here, I'm not trying to be, I'm bad, my ancestors, I'm a white man, I'm so guilty. It's not that. I'm trying to frame this in the sense of we don't have to reinvent the wheel, right? The native flora of this region was already built on a foundation of this anthropology, of the intentional management of the indigenous people. And we should lean on that. We should recognize that. We should honor that. And we need to reconcile this history as well if we're going to move forward. So right now, agroforestry getting a lot of buzzword talk. USDA is supporting a lot of things. So you all might be familiar with terms like forest farming, wild simulated crops, non-timber forest products, mushroom cultivation. All these kinds of things are out there, and they're very adjacent to permaculture, to forest, food forests, whatever. But just to say that there's different Venn diagrams, and whatever career you're in, you might interact with these to a greater or lesser extent. But I draw certainly from this tradition, even though I'm a little bit more in the urban food forest tradition, because I'm a city kid originally. I just, sorry. And urban food forests were actually just this year recognized by the USDA as one of the accepted management practices in agroforestry. And I say capital A agroforestry, so like the stuff that NRCS says, yes, we recognize that works, we'll give you money for it. So you gotta, this is the ecology that we work in, right? We have to figure out how the practices that we want to implement fit into the existing funding structures and stuff like that. But urban food forests just this year now recognized, I think it's the 5th one, so we had windbreaks, alley cropping, riparian forest buffers like Lee just talked about, silvopasture, and now urban food forests. Now why urban? I think it's just an artifact of the density of population in urban areas, and that these food forests often come from like a community garden type of framework rather than an agronomic production kind of framework. So there may be some differences there in terms of what's relevant to your property. I would say that the kind of management that I put in place with the food forest stuff really has an upper limit of maybe 5 to 7 acres that you can manage realistically. Now, if you have a big family, If you have a whole culture of people who are going to help you do this, then of course it can be at a larger scale. But in terms of, if you're thinking about large scale production, you're doing row crops elsewhere on your property, try to be realistic about where you can really do something like a food forest, because it is very intensive on the knowledge side of things. So I do just want to name that there's a bunch of books out there, lots of literature. In my career, these have probably been the most influential. Dave Jackie's Edible Forest Gardens books, which are kind of some of the best tomes for temperate forest gardening out there. Now these are over a decade old at this point, and Dave himself would say there's a lot of outdated stuff in there. But in terms of wrapping your head around all the considerations and things like that, I really do consider these. So there's plenty out there for you. This is an extension publication from Virginia Cooperative Extension. Virginia Tech is actually kind of really, as far as land-grant universities, leading the charge in our region for some of these agroforestry practices. But this one came out in 2018, How to Plan for and Plant Streamside Conservation Buffers with Native Fruit and Nut Trees and Woody Floral Shrubs. So basically taking riparian forest buffers as a management practice, as a BMP, and then let's turn it into a food forest at the same time. So they call these multifunctional riparian vegetated buffers. It's a mouthful, but you can kind of say to someone, hey, I'm doing the riparian BMP thing, but we're also going to be producing some crops in there. This publication is very basic, but it's awesome to have if you just need to show someone that, hey, I'm not making this up, this is a real thing. We will get this PDF to Lee, and anybody who wants this, we'll make sure to get that to you. So this is the site that I'm working on, Kilrush Food Forest, 3-acre riparian municipal greenway in Lexington. As you can see, it is a residential neighborhood. We have single-family homes and duplexes on the west side of the street, and then down here towards the bottom of the image is Wolf Run Creek. So we have kind of our riparian area. This is a map that I had to do for the city. This is about as much as I get into the graphics. If I do just enough to get them to approve the project, and then after that, we're a little more free with it. But you can see here all the different utilities that are marked. That's something that is possibly unique to urban areas. It's definitely a challenge, but you are also going to see a lot of utilities, gas lines, sanitary sewer, water lines, things like that are going to tend to run through the bottom of your valleys, so you have to work around them. So as I mentioned, this is the largest public food forest in Kentucky. We've had well over 100 people out there over the course of the year. We do tours, we do plantings. If any of y'all want to come visit, please come. This is a huge part of, it's really the flagship project for my company, and it's something that it really gets me excited that it's becoming more of a regional point of reference, that folks are coming to the urban areas where we have this history of some of these food forest community gardens, basically, and seeing what they can take back to communities like here in Hindman. So this is a pollinator garden that was planted this spring by natural resources students from the University of Kentucky. I have this slide in here just to highlight how important the community partnerships are, because I personally am not going to put 2,000 plugs in the ground. It's going to, wear out all my joints. And it's an opportunity for the students to learn, to get their hands in the ground. Usually when you have school projects, it's very difficult for a student to go from conceptualization to implementation on a project just within the space of a semester or whatever they have. So when we have this project going, the food forest is there, they know they can jump in and basically we can work together to get something in the ground a lot quicker. So it's super valuable for all the colleges we work with, and I would encourage you to also look for those partnerships. Get people on your land to help you to do this so that you can learn together. This is what the site looked like when we started. It used to be single-family homes like there were just across the street, but of course they built them in the floodplain. So after a while, FEMA decided, yeah, we need to get rid of this. So they knocked them all down, and then basically the property just sat like this for about 20 years. And so the city would pay contractors to just mow the area, and then of course also in this photo you can't even see the creek because it's been absolutely choked out by Amur honeysuckle, which is sort of our worst invasive woody shrub in the central bluegrass. So you guys don't really have it out here on the sandstone. But so we went in there and we started cutting this stuff out. And in this photo, you can see all of the stems of the honeysuckle. I hadn't cut them down flush to the ground yet. We were just trying to get, to be able to see in there. But we start discovering amazing things like this old silver maple. And, we keep going. And then we have more and more of this space open up. Again, this was completely choked through with invasive vegetation. So now that we've chopped it out, we have to, replant, right? Because we're going to restabilize the bank in there. Something really cool in this photo is you can see this brush pile here. This is all of that honeysuckle and some other invasives that we pulled out of there. We piled that up to create a physical barrier so that the mowing contractors could not come into our riparian buffer and kill all the trees. Hopefully if you're on private land, that's not something you got to worry about. On public land, that is huge, huge deal. Mowers kill trees, and you basically have to build a wall to keep them out. So that was a really successful element of the site. I'll talk it up a little more here in a second. But this is just getting started in 2020. We did about 1/10 of an acre just to prove to the city that we could do it. This is engineers from the city and a watershed nonprofit that are out there inspecting our work. You can see our nice brush pile, right? We've extended the riparian buffer out from here, where you can see kind of forest soil, into the mowed turf area. What is all this doing? This is keeping that nutrient cycle here on site. Honeysuckle, very nitrogen-rich material. We want that in our soils. It's creating a lot of habitat, obviously. It's creating microclimates because we have a shady side, a sunny side, a wet side, a dry side. As this material breaks down, that microbial activity is also going to raise the temperature, so we have something to plant into. It's slowing down the stormwater runoff, right? Most importantly, I, as one guy with a pickup truck, did not have to haul this all off. This is really important. And so that is a very successful element to this site. What do we got planted here? We have up front, this is a goose plum, Prunus munsoniana. Love it, takes heavy clay really well. Then we have a blueberry that we got off of a limestone bluff, so we're hoping it'll do okay in some calcareous soils. Next to that, a serviceberry, on and on and on. What you can't see here is in between the serviceberry and the goose plum, I've planted a black locust. What you'll also notice is we're under the power lines here, right? So I'm making a case to the energy company that's had a lot of bad publicity for cutting people's trees down over the last few years, that, hey, put a blueberry, put a plum. Why can't these things just live under a power line, be nice and happy? It's a PR victory for you. Great. So why do I plant a black locust? It's an enormous tree, right? I'm cutting it back every 2 or 3 years. I chop that thing back hard because black locust forms a nitrogen-fixing, or an association with nitrogen-fixing bacteria in the soil. And so it's going to help remediate that soil over time. It also does not care if you chop it back. It says, oh, thank you, and it just resprouts and it sends out, all kinds of shoots and this kind of stuff. But when you cut it back, the associated root systems underground are going to die back because they no longer have that top growth to support. So that's going to release the nitrogen in the soil. Over time, this urban construction fill is going to get remediated over and over again. Now I am switching to some smaller nitrogen fixers, other legumes like Illinois bundle flower, things like that, just so the power company won't get mad at me. But that is a super cool kind of management practice that you're not going to see on a lot of different agricultural systems. And it's something really nice for when we have students out there. I can chop it down right in front of them. I know I'm not hurting that black locust. But eventually, we're going to completely subordinate it to the plum tree, which is what we really want. These species are not always easy to find. A lot of it I actually gather seed. I take it to the horticulture department at UK, and these are all things that they've grown for me. So we have some equisetum, some horsetail, some sweet birch, red mulberry, high bush cranberry, passion fruit, cross vine, just various things that it's worth understanding that these things are not always available in the trade. Because people don't know about them or because they don't have big, showy blooms or whatever. So if you're thinking about what you can do with these plants, understand that there is that gap in the availability, and so you could be a seed source or you could be a source for vegetative propagation or something like that. And if you want to focus on some of these ethnobotanically significant plants, I think we're only going to see more and more interest And this event is an indication of that, of course. So here's a basic inventory of, as far as woody plants, what was on the site when we started. And here's what we planted. So we just about quadrupled the woody species plant diversity there. And some of this is oddball stuff. Some of this I don't know how it's going to stand up to the deer pressure we have out there, how it's going to stand up to the neighborhood kids running through it. But I really think that over time, this is going to distill down into a palette of maybe 10, 15 plants that I feel really confident I can take to other neighborhoods and say, this is going to work, right? But something to note here, as you're looking at this stuff, you're probably, despite my previous comment about how this stuff isn't available, you're probably not seeing anything that you're like, I've never heard of that before, right? It's a lot of stuff that you're probably familiar with, that you see every day. And that's kind of amazing. And we should recognize that there's a reason for that, right? That what we think of, or what we define as the native flora of this region, is really the intentionally managed polyculture of the indigenous peoples that spent thousands of years assembling this. And those people were very mobile on the landscape. The seeds were very mobile on the landscape. The genetics, right? So we don't get to do quote unquote ecological restoration, whatever that means, unless we are also restoring the anthropological element of that, the social structures, the culture that tend those plants, maintain them, domesticate them over time, whatever the case may be. A lot of people don't realize that here in Kentucky, this is one of the world's great hearths of plant domestication, right? We think about corn coming from Mesoamerica. We think about wheat, barley from the Fertile Crescent, whatever. What about sunflowers, right? One of the most significant crops internationally, and the oldest archaeological evidence that we have of it is from a rock shelter here in the Red River Gorge. So pretty amazing. Again, this is a foundation that we have to build off of. We don't have to reinvent the wheel, but we have to recognize that the plants and the people co-evolved, right? So we don't get to have the plants, we don't get to have a food forest at whatever scale unless there is also some sort of culture of people that's going to be in there taking care of it. And we can talk about plant domestication and stuff like that, pretty fascinating. I'm just going to talk about a couple individual plant species here because I think there's just interesting things to say about them. This one here, does anyone recognize this just from looking at the leaf shape or anything? It's a fruit tree, I'll tell you that much. Oh, it's a what? Oh, well, it's a peach. So this is a peach, Prunus persica. All right, so here's the deal. I get my funding mostly through ecological restoration, water quality grants and stuff, and I pretty much exclusively work with native plants for a variety of reasons. This guy, of course, this is a Eurasian peach. This is not native to North America. What gives? Why is it out here? So here's the story. 1590, something like that, Spanish invaders show up in Tampa Bay. They bring a bunch of stuff with them from Europe. One of the things they bring are peaches. Some of the native peoples, I think it would have been fascinating to see what kind of conversations they were having around this, but some of the native peoples at least adopt this plant. They say, wow, check this out, it's a good fruit. Let's take these genetics, let's take the peach pit, let's trade. Those genetics stay in the trade routes just in front of the smallpox, such that hundreds of years later, Daniel Boone shows up in Kentucky, lays eyes, on the fabled cane lands, and indigenous people in North America have been cultivating peach for generations at that point. So they've applied their own selection criteria, right? Their own, what are the genetics that they're choosing. And so this is what's called a Cherokee peach. It's that lineage that has survived on this landscape. And I mean, just what a juicy conversation that just was. I know I'm just talking here, but think about that, right? There's a reason to have, I'm not even that big of a fan of peaches, but in the context of a food forest and teaching people about all this stuff, this is a lot to talk about. And we really need to be thinking about that relationship between people and plants. What is a native plant, right? There's some arbitrary definitions there, some less arbitrary ones, but somewhere in there it gets fuzzy because it's ecology, right? And I think we need to put the anthropological aspect in there as well. Okay, this one. Anybody know this one? Herbaceous. Yes, sir. Yeah, sunchokes, Helianthus tuberosus. So this is a perennial. It's a perennial sunflower. Sunflower, right? Helianthus. Tuberosus, the species name means the tuberous sunflower. So this is a root crop. This guy here, this is one of those plants that's like, it's the crop of the future and always will be. You can look back at like periods of time like in World War II when they were researching all kinds of stuff because they needed to find different products and stuff. It was like, yeah, Jerusalem artichoke, this is going to be the thing of the future. Who knows? Why do I have it up here? First of all, native composite flower, aster family, great pollinator. It's not around for that long, but a great pollinator plant. The fact that it's perennial, right, it's going to hold the soils. It has a tuberous growth, so it's actually really going to hold the soils. It's pretty aggressive. You might even call it a native invasive, depending on your context. You probably don't want this in your residential garden. But out here in a floodplain, it's great. The other thing about it is that I think if we're going to talk a good game about this stuff, we have to actually be able to make like credible claims about the nutritional content of these plants, right? What are the micronutrients? Where are you getting your macros and stuff like that? And this guy here is one of the things that is going to allow me to talk about calories in a relevant way. 3 acres, not that big, but some plants like this are actually worth putting in for that reason. We can talk about some other perennials as well. This is a little antioxidant chart. I just threw this in here. Antioxidants, by the way, a class of chemical vitamins and various other things that people kind of use as a shorthand for it's really healthy because it has antioxidants, because these antioxidants kind of mitigate some of the damaging effects of free radicals and stuff. But if you look at what plants have the highest levels of antioxidants in it, you have to get all the way down here to pomegranate somewhere before you're really dealing with stuff that isn't native here, right? Stuff that we can't be growing. I mean, aronia, black aronia, Aronia melanocarpa, global superfood now, getting a marketing buzz. It grows right here in the sandy soils of this region. We're also doing research. We've partnered with the Land Institute out of Kansas, with several other research sites as well, where we have plots of annual crops next to potential perennial alternatives, because we see that this is the direction things are going in. You have to think about the annual crops, all the domesticated crops that we rely on. Those things were domesticated and cultivated historically under conditions of climatic stability, which we no longer can take for granted. So that's why we really need to be thinking about these perennials, these more resilient crops, things that keep their root systems in the ground one season after another. I'm running out of time, so I'm not gonna get too deep into this patch design thing, but I did just wanna talk about how I start drilling down on a site, going from patterns to details, defining what are these ecologically distinct patches that I can kind of maybe focus on one at a time, break down that whole site into manageable bite-sized pieces. So what do I mean by going from patterns to details? A pattern could be an urban riparian floodplain. That is a pattern, right? We have several of these all over town. We have them in other cities, and I can assume a bunch of stuff about them. Your pattern might be something like a fallow crop field or a south-facing sandstone slope or something like that, right? Something that just gets you started. And then I have to stress that you have to spend time out there. I've done consults for people with rural properties. We spend 2 hours out there. I tell them everything I would do on the property, whatever. And then I leave sad because when we were out there, I could see that they never walk the property, right? Everywhere I wanted to go and check out, whatever, there wasn't a footpath already through there. And so I can tell them about all the cool things that they should do on their property, but if they're not actually out there in daily relationship with it, it's probably not gonna happen. So be realistic about, a food forest may sound like a great idea, but it might not be really what you want to invest your time in. And what's amazing about the invasive plants, complex discussion about invasive plants, but one of the great gifts that they have brought us is the opportunity to sit there and work with them. And so I sit there and we pull this stuff out mechanically by hand, and it takes forever. And in the process of doing that, we see exactly where all the wildlife trails are. The wildlife is smarter than us. They already know topographically what the best, most efficient kind of access points are. As we're going back and forth, hauling mulch and all these kinds of things, we see where we want to preferentially take that wheelbarrow. So I'm not sitting at home, putting dots on a paper and saying, I think a bur oak would look good there and stuff like that, because that's a way to plant a tree that you're going to have to spend the next 30 years walking around very inefficiently, right? But if you're out on the site and you know where you walk because you know your body wants to take you in this direction and this is the quickest line from A to B and all this kind of stuff, then you start planting around that. Start thinking about that. So I'll just blow through here real quick some of the different things. We're out of time, right? Yeah, so just to say, you know, we think about some of these distinct things, like I see this, this juniper here, I see this mature black walnut, and I say, okay, each of those is a distinct experience. I'm gonna design around them. Our big silver maple, that's a distinct experience. When I'm under that canopy, it just feels different, and it feels like I'm getting into a new zone as I walk out from it. So that's a delineation. I go around and I start making these bubble diagrams, and this is literally just what I'm doing on my, you know, as I'm walking someone's land. I'm like, this kind of looks like this, and this looks like it, you know, continues up until the slope changes or whatever. And I'm designing as well. I'm putting not just what I see there, but also what I kind of think might be there. We then take this up through a full design, and I don't really like, as I said, making these graphics, but they can be pretty cool to show people what you're thinking about. And so like each of these could be a distinct ecology, a distinct plant palette, and then you can go even more into detail, which I really don't recommend you do, but some clients want to see this. That's it. That's the whole thing. Ending on this slide, this is some of the kids in the neighborhood. I want to really reinforce this piece of you have to spend at least as much, if not more time, designing the social elements of your system as you do picking what plants, or else it's going to fail. It's going to fail. It's going to look really good or whatever. Maybe you'll be happy with it, but it's not going to benefit anyone else, and it's not going to be sustainable over time. So that is conceptually something that we're dealing with as a civilization, right? Is how do we be more collaborative with each other? So that is it. If you want to know more about Geomancer, what I do, we're on Instagram, we're on YouTube. I'd love to hear from you. We're on Patreon as well if you want to support us financially. And we'll get into we'll talk about whatever y'all want to talk about. Thank you.